Welcome to the channel. I know many of you listen to these videos to relax or fall asleep, and I'm really glad you're here. Before we start today's crime stories, please take a moment to subscribe if you haven't already. And if there's any crime story you'd like me to narrate for you, feel free to request it in the comments section. Now let's begin. Story 1. Donald Harvey was born on April 15, 1952, in Hamilton, Ohio. He was the oldest of 3 children. His parents were named Ray and Goldie Harvey. The family was poor. Ray and Goldie worked as tobacco farmers. They were also very religious. They were members of the Baptist church in their community. When Donald was still a child, his family moved from Ohio to a very small town named Boonville. Boonville is in Kentucky. Life there was quiet and isolated. The family struggled to make money from their farm. Donald helped with work on the farm as he grew up. From the age of 5 until he was 18 years old, Donald Harvey was sexually abused. This abuse was done to him by 2 different people. One was an uncle. The other was a neighbor. Donald did not tell anyone about this abuse while it was happening. The only person he ever told was his sister. He told his sister about it only after the abuse had finally stopped. Donald attended school, but he did not finish. He dropped out of school when he was in the 9th grade. Later, he decided to continue his education on his own. In 1968, he earned a GED. A GED is a certificate that is equal to a high school diploma. He earned it by taking correspondence courses, which means he studied at home using mail-in lessons. In March of 1971, Donald Harvey was arrested. He was arrested for the crime of burglary. Burglary means illegally entering a building to steal things. After this arrest, he decided to join the United States Air Force. He hoped military service would give his life a new direction. His time in the Air Force was short. He was discharged after only 9 months. The reason for his discharge was that he had tried to kill himself twice. These suicide attempts were seen as nervous breakdowns. It was during this difficult period that Donald began to accept that he was homosexual. After leaving the Air Force, Donald needed a job. He began working in hospitals. His first job was at Marymount Hospital in London, Kentucky. He was 18 years old. His job title was an orderly. An orderly is a person who helps nurses with basic patient care. This job gave him access to hospital wards and to sick patients. Donald Harvey started his job as an orderly at Marymount Hospital. He helped nurses by moving patients, delivering food, and changing bed sheets. In May of 1970, he was assigned to care for an 88-year-old patient named Logan Evans. Evans had suffered a stroke and was incontinent, which meant he could not control his bladder or bowels. One day, while Harvey was cleaning him, the patient smeared feces on Harvey's arms. This made Harvey very angry. Harvey's anger led him to commit his first murder. He took a pillow from the bed. He pressed the pillow down over Logan Evans's face and held it there. He did this until the old man stopped breathing. Harvey later said he killed Evans because he was angry about the feces. After this first killing, Harvey did not stop. Over the next 10 months while he worked at Marymount Hospital, he killed at least 12 patients. He said he sometimes killed because he felt empathy for suffering patients. Other times, he killed because he was angry at a patient for something they did. He did not use one single method to kill. His methods changed based on what was available and what he felt like doing. He sometimes suffocated patients with a pillow or a plastic bag. He sometimes gave them a faulty oxygen tank so they could not breathe. He once gave a patient a catheter that was too large and then inserted a straightened metal coat hanger into it, which punctured the patient's organs. He also gave patients deadly overdoses of their pain medications like morphine. In 1975, Harvey began working at a different hospital the Cincinnati Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Ohio. He continued to kill patients there. He now began to use poison. He started using arsenic and cyanide. He would put these poisons into patients' food, their drinks, or into the liquid food that was given through tubes. He also injected poisons directly into patients' bodies. He killed many people this way because the poisons were hard to detect and often made a death look like a natural heart attack or failure. Harvey's crimes were not limited to hospital patients. He lived in an apartment with a man named Carl Holer, who was his lover. Harvey suspected Holer was being unfaithful. To keep Holer from going out, Harvey began putting small amounts of arsenic in his food. This made Holer sick with stomach pains, so he would stay home. Harvey also poisoned his neighbors. He put hepatitis-infected serum into a drink of one neighbor, making her very ill. He put arsenic into a pie he gave to another neighbor, a 63-year-old woman named Helen Metzger, and she died. He later poisoned and killed Carl Holer's father, Henry, with arsenic as well. In 1986, Harvey got a job at Drake Memorial Hospital in Cincinnati. He worked in a part of the hospital where very sick patients were kept. Many of these patients were not expected to live. This made it easier for Harvey to kill without raising suspicion. He used cyanide poison most often at this hospital. He would add it to orange juice, cranberry juice, or to the liquid in feeding tubes. The patients would die very quickly. Because they were already very sick, their sudden deaths did not always cause alarm among the hospital staff. However, some nurses at Drake Hospital began to notice a problem. They saw that an unusual number of patients were dying suddenly when Donald Harvey was working his shifts. These nurses talked to the hospital administrators about their concerns. The administrators told the nurses to be quiet. They did not want any investigation or bad publicity for the hospital. So, the nurses said nothing more at the time. Harvey committed his final murder at Drake Hospital in March of 1987. The victim was a 44-year-old man named John Powell. Powell was in the hospital because of a serious motorcycle accident. He was on life support. Harvey put cyanide into Powell's feeding tube. John Powell died shortly after. This death, however, would be different from the others. The death of John Powell at Drake Hospital in March 1987 was treated as suspicious. This was because he died very suddenly. A standard autopsy was performed on his body. The autopsy tests found a large amount of cyanide poison in his system. This result meant Powell had been murdered. The police were called to investigate a homicide at the hospital. The police began to look at the hospital staff. They learned that Donald Harvey had been forced to resign from the Cincinnati VA hospital years earlier. The reason for his resignation was that he had been caught stealing body parts from the morgue. He had taken these body parts for use in occult rituals. This information made Harvey a person of interest in the new poisoning case. The police brought Harvey in for questioning. During questioning, Donald Harvey confessed to killing John Powell. He told the police he put cyanide in Powell's feeding tube. He said he did it to end Powell's suffering. After this confession, a local television reporter named Pat Menarkin was reporting on the arrest. Menarkin thought it was strange that a hospital worker would suddenly kill a patient after 17 years of work. He asked on television if Harvey could have killed other people. After this news report, the nurses from Drake Hospital, who had been told to stay quiet, decided to come forward. They contacted reporter Pat Menarkin. They told him about the unusual number of deaths when Harvey worked. They gave him information that linked Harvey to at least 10 more murders. Menarkin investigated for several months. He found enough evidence to do a television report linking Harvey to 24 murders over 4 years. Harvey's court-appointed lawyer, Bill Whalen, learned about the reporter's findings. Whalen asked Harvey if he had killed anyone else. Harvey replied that he had killed many more people. He estimated the number was as high as 70. Whalen knew Ohio law allowed for the death penalty if someone was convicted of more than one murder. To save Harvey from execution, Whalen made a deal with the prosecutors. The deal was this: Harvey would tell the police about every murder he committed. In return, the prosecutors would not ask for the death penalty. They would instead ask for a sentence of life in prison with no chance of parole. The prosecutors agreed to this plea bargain. Harvey then spent many hours with the police. He confessed in detail to 24 murders in Ohio. In August 1987, Donald Harvey pleaded guilty in court to 24 counts of murder. Because of the plea deal, the judge sentenced him to 3 life sentences in prison. These sentences would run at the same time, meaning he would never be released. Later, in November 1987, Harvey was also taken to Kentucky to face charges for murders at Marymount Hospital. He pleaded guilty there to 8 more murders and 1 manslaughter. He received another life sentence, which was added to his Ohio sentence. In total, Donald Harvey officially pleaded guilty to 37 murders. He was taken to the Ohio State Prison System to begin his life sentence on October 26, 1987. He remained in prison for decades. On March 28, 2017, another inmate attacked Donald Harvey in his prison cell. The inmate beat Harvey very badly. Harvey was taken to a hospital inside the prison. He died from his injuries 2 days later, on March 30, 2017. The inmate who killed him was named James Elliott. In 2019, Elliott pleaded guilty to murdering Harvey. Elliott said he killed Harvey because he was angry about Harvey's crimes and because Harvey bragged about killing elderly people in prison. Elliott was given an additional prison sentence of 25 years to life for this murder. Donald Harvey died in prison 30 years after being caught for the murders he committed in the hospitals where he worked. Story 2. Richard Benjamin Speck was born in 1941 in Kirkwood, Illinois. He was the 7th of 8 children. His father, Benjamin, worked as a farmer and a logger before getting a job at a pottery factory. His mother, Mary, was a strict religious woman who did not drink alcohol. The family moved to Monmouth, Illinois, shortly after Richard's birth. When Richard was 6 years old, his father died suddenly from a heart attack. Richard was very close to his father, and the loss was hard for him. 3 years later, his mother remarried. Her new husband was a man named Carl Lindbergh. Carl was a traveling insurance salesman from Texas. He had a criminal record and drank alcohol heavily, unlike Richard's father. After the marriage, Richard and his younger sister stayed with an older sister in Monmouth to finish the school year. Then they moved to rural Texas to live with their mother and stepfather. Life in Texas did not last long. In 1951, the family moved to Dallas, Texas. Over the next 12 years, they moved to 10 different addresses, always in poor parts of the city. Richard disliked his stepfather, who was often drunk, abusive, and away from home. Richard struggled in school. He needed glasses to read, but refused to wear them. He was very quiet in class because he was afraid of people looking at him. He failed 8th grade partly because he would not speak. He started high school but failed every subject in his first semester. He dropped out of school in early 1958 when he was 16 years old. Richard started drinking alcohol when he was 12. By age 15, he was getting drunk almost every day. His first arrest came at age 13 for trespassing. Over the next 8 years, he was arrested dozens of times for small crimes like public drunkenness and fighting. In 1960, he got a job as a laborer at a soft drink bottling plant. In late 1961, he met a 15-year-old girl named Shirley Malone at a fair. She became pregnant quickly, and they married in early 1962. They moved in with his sister. His daughter was born in July 1962, while Richard was serving a short jail sentence for a drunken fight. In 1963, at age 21, he was sentenced to 3 years in prison for forgery and burglary. He had stolen and cashed a coworker's paycheck. He served 16 months before being released on parole in 1965. His freedom lasted only 1 week. He was arrested for attacking a woman in a parking lot with a knife. He was sent back to prison, but was mistakenly released after only 6 months. After his release, he worked briefly as a truck driver, but was fired for not showing up. In late 1965, he moved in with a divorced woman who was a bartender to babysit her children. His wife filed for divorce in early 1966. That same month, he stabbed a man in a bar fight. His mother hired a lawyer who got the charge reduced. He paid a small fine and served 3 days in jail. In March 1966, he bought an old car. The next night, he used it to rob a grocery store of cigarettes, which he sold from the car's trunk. The police identified his car and issued a warrant for his arrest. Knowing he would go back to prison if caught, he decided to leave Texas. On March 9, 1966, his sister drove him to a bus station. He bought a ticket to Chicago, Illinois. He stayed with his married sister in Chicago for a few days, then went to his old hometown of Monmouth, Illinois. His brother found him work as a carpenter's helper. He was angry to learn his ex-wife had remarried just 2 days after their divorce was final. He moved into a cheap hotel and spent his time and money in local bars. On April 3, 1966, a 65-year-old woman in Monmouth returned home late at night. A tall man with a soft southern voice was inside. He blindfolded her, tied her up, raped her, and stole a small amount of money from her house. A week later, a local barmaid was found dead in an empty farm building. She had been killed by a blow to her stomach. Richard had been to the bar where that woman worked. He had also helped build farm buildings in the area. The police questioned him about the death when he came to collect his final paycheck. They asked him to stay in town. A few days later, when police went to his hotel to question him again, he was gone. He had left town quickly. Police searched his hotel room. They found items reported stolen from the home of the 65-year-old woman, as well as from other local burglaries. On April 19, 1966, Richard Speck returned to his sister's apartment in Chicago. Richard Speck returned to his sister Martha's apartment in Chicago on April 19, 1966. He told his sister and her husband a story about being forced to leave Monmouth because a crime gang wanted him to sell drugs. His brother-in-law, Gene, thought a job on a ship might be good for him. On April 25th, Gene took Speck to a U.S. Coast Guard office. Speck applied for a permit to work as a trainee seaman. This process required him to be fingerprinted and photographed. Speck quickly found work on a larger ship called the Clarence B. Randall. He joined the crew on April 30th. His time on the ship was very short. On May 3rd, he had severe stomach pain. A Coast Guard helicopter took him to a hospital in Michigan. Doctors performed an emergency surgery for appendicitis. After leaving the hospital, Speck went back to his sister's apartment in Chicago to recover. On May 20th, he rejoined the ship's crew. He worked on the ship until June 14th. On that day, he got drunk and argued with a ship officer. He was told to leave the ship the next day. For about a week, he lived in a cheap boarding house in Chicago. Then he took a train to Michigan to visit a nurse he had met in the hospital. She gave him $80. He returned to his sister's Chicago apartment in late June and stayed for 2 weeks. On June 30th, his brother-in-law drove him to the National Maritime Union Hiring Hall in Chicago. This was a place where seamen went to find ship jobs. Speck filed paperwork to get a proper seaman's card. The hiring hall was on East 100th Street. Directly across the street was a row of 5 townhouses. 3 of these townhouses were used as dormitories for student nurses working at a nearby hospital. On Friday, July 8th, Gene drove Speck back to the hiring hall to pick up his new seaman's card and look for a job. Speck did not get a job that day. He returned to his sister's apartment for the weekend. By Monday, July 11th, he had worn out his welcome. His sister and her husband wanted him to leave. Jean drove him back to the hiring hall so he could wait for a job assignment. That night, Speck stayed at a different boarding house. On Tuesday, July 12th, Speck was at the hiring hall again. In the afternoon, he was assigned a job on a tanker ship in Indiana. He was driven there, but when he arrived, he was told the job was already taken. He was driven back to the Chicago hiring hall, but it was closed for the day. Speck had little money left. He left his bags at a gas station 6 blocks away and slept in an unfinished building. On Wednesday, July 13th, Speck picked up his bags and went to the hiring hall in the morning. He was angry about the failed job assignment. His sister and brother-in-law met him there at 9 a.m. They talked in their car, which was parked on East 100th Street, right next to the townhouses where the nurses lived. By 10:30 a.m., Speck was tired of waiting. He had $25 his sister had given him. He left the hiring hall and walked about a mile and a half east to a boarding house called the Shipyard Inn. He rented a room there. Speck spent the rest of the day drinking alcohol in several bars near the boarding house. In one of these bars, he met a 53-year-old woman named Ella Mae Hooper. She had also been drinking. Later that evening, Speck approached Hooper with a knife. He forced her to go to his room at the Shipyard Inn. There, he raped her. Afterward, he stole her purse. Inside her purse was a small .22 caliber pistol. Speck took this gun. Speck then changed his clothes. He put on all black clothing. He put the stolen pistol in his pocket. He also had a switchblade knife. He left the boarding house and went to a nearby restaurant for dinner. After dinner, he returned to the bar at the Shipyard Inn and drank until about 10:20 p.m. He then left and walked back west along East 100th Street toward the nurses' townhouses. Shortly before 11 p.m., Speck arrived at 2319 East 100th Street. This was the easternmost townhouse. 8 student nurses lived there. A 9th nurse was visiting for the night. Speck broke into the townhouse. He was armed with his knife and the stolen gun. Once inside, he gathered the 9 young women together. He told them he would not harm them. He said he only wanted money for a trip to New Orleans. He used bed sheets to tie their hands. He led them one by one into different bedrooms. His plan began to change. He started to kill the nurses one at a time. He would take a single nurse out of the main group. He then stabbed or strangled her to death in another room. He did this repeatedly over several hours. He killed 8 of the 9 women. The intervals between each murder were 20 to 30 minutes. He raped the last victim, a 22-year-old woman named Gloria Davy, before strangling her. One nurse, a 23-year-old woman named Corazon Amureo, hid under a bed in one of the bedrooms while Speck was in another part of the townhouse. Speck either lost count of how many women were there or did not know a visitor was present. He did not find Amureo. She stayed hidden under the bed, terrified, until early the next morning. After killing the 8 women, Speck left the townhouse. He walked away from the building. He left behind the scene of the crime. He did not take any significant amount of money. He did not know one victim had survived. Early on the morning of July 14th, 1966, the surviving nurse, Corazon Amureo, finally came out from under the bed. She saw the bodies of her friends. She went to a window on the 2nd floor of the townhouse. She saw a man walking on the street below. She screamed for help from the window. The man heard her and told a neighbor to call the police. Police officers arrived at the townhouse at approximately 6 a.m. They found Amureo and the bodies of the 8 other women. Amureo was able to describe the attacker to the police. She said he was a white man with a southern accent. She said he had a tattoo on his left arm that said "Born to Raise Hell." She told police he had taken money from some of the women. The police investigation began immediately. Fingerprint experts collected prints from the townhouse. These fingerprints were sent to be checked against police records. Detectives also learned from the National Maritime Union that a man named Richard Speck had been at their hiring hall across the street just the day before. Speck had been fingerprinted for his seaman's card. The police compared those fingerprints to the ones from the crime scene. They matched. Richard Speck was now the prime suspect. The police distributed a sketch of Speck to the public and the press. They began searching for him. Meanwhile, Speck had not left Chicago. 2 days after the murders, on July 15th, he was drinking with 2 other men on a fire escape at the Star Hotel in a different part of the city. One of these men was named Claude Lunsford. On July 16th, Lunsford saw the sketch of the murder suspect in the evening newspaper. He recognized the man as Richard Speck, who was actually in Lunsford's own hotel room at that moment. Lunsford left the room and called the police from the hotel lobby. He told them the wanted man was in his room. For reasons that were not clear, the police did not respond to this call. Later that night, Speck tried to kill himself in the hotel room. He cut his wrist and inner elbow with a broken glass. The hotel desk clerk found him and called for an ambulance at around midnight. Speck was taken to Cook County Hospital. At the hospital, a young surgical resident doctor named Leroy Smith was treating Speck's injuries. Dr. Smith saw the "Born to Raise Hell" tattoo on Speck's arm. He had read about this tattoo in the newspaper description of the nursing school killer. Dr. Smith immediately called the police. Richard Speck was placed under arrest at the hospital in the early hours of July 17th. Speck's trial began in April 1967. It was held in Peoria, Illinois, to avoid intense publicity in Chicago. The main witness was Corazon Amureo. In the courtroom, she was asked to identify the killer. She walked from the witness stand to where Speck was sitting. She pointed her finger directly at him and said, "This is the man." A police fingerprint expert also testified, explaining how the fingerprints from the townhouse matched Speck's. The defense argued that Speck was insane at the time of the murders. A psychiatrist testified that Speck had brain damage from past injuries and was influenced by drugs and alcohol. The jury did not accept this argument. They deliberated for only 49 minutes. They found Richard Speck guilty of murder. They recommended the death penalty. In June 1967, a judge formally sentenced Speck to die in the electric chair. Speck's lawyers appealed the sentence. In 1971, the U.S. Supreme Court reviewed the case. The court upheld the guilty conviction but overturned the death penalty. The court said the original trial had improperly excluded potential jurors who had doubts about the death penalty. By 1972, new national rulings made the death penalty unavailable. In November 1972, Speck was resentenced to serve 400 to 1,200 years in prison. Richard Speck was sent to the Stateville Correctional Center in Illinois. He had multiple parole hearings, but was always denied release. In prison, he was mostly a loner. He collected stamps and kept pet birds. However, he was also caught with illegal drugs and homemade alcohol on many occasions. In 1978, Speck gave one interview to a newspaper columnist. For the first time publicly, he confessed to the murders. He said he could not remember details and claimed he was high on drugs and alcohol. He said he was sorry for the victims and their families. In 1996, a videotape from inside the prison was made public. It was recorded secretly by inmates in 1988. The tape showed Speck using cocaine and engaging in sexual acts with other inmates. On the tape, he bragged about the murders. When an inmate behind the camera asked why he killed the nurses, Speck said, "It just wasn't their night." In early December 1991, Speck was taken from prison to a hospital after complaining of chest pains. He died of a heart attack on December 5, 1991, one day before his 50th birthday. An autopsy showed he had severe heart disease. His body was cremated, and his ashes were scattered in an undisclosed location in Illinois. Story 3. Peter William Sutcliffe was born on June 2nd, 1946, in Shipley, England. He grew up in a working-class family in the town of Bingley. His father, John, worked as a wool mill worker. His mother's name was Kathleen. Peter was the eldest of 6 children. His family life was difficult. His father drank alcohol heavily and was violent. John Sutcliffe would often hit his wife and children. Peter was sometimes beaten with a belt. Once, during an argument, his father broke a beer glass over Peter's head. The family was raised as Catholics, and for a short time, Peter was an altar boy at church. When Peter was a young man, his father did a strange thing. He tricked Peter's mother into meeting him at a hotel, saying he was another man. He brought Peter and some of the other children to watch. When Kathleen arrived, John took a nightgown from her purse to shame her in front of the children. This event was very unsettling. Peter was not a social person. He was described as a loner. He left school when he was 15 years old. After school, he had many simple jobs. One of his jobs was as a graveyard digger at the Bingley Cemetery. He worked there 2 different times in the 1960s. His co-workers noticed he seemed to enjoy this job too much. He would volunteer to work extra hours to wash dead bodies. He made dark jokes about his work. He later worked in a television factory on a packing line. After that, he worked night shifts at an engineering firm. He lost a job in 1976 for stealing old tires. He then trained to be a truck driver and found work with a company in Bradford. In his personal time, as a teenager and young man, Peter developed a habit of spying on people. He would secretly watch prostitutes and their clients in the red light areas of Leeds and Bradford. It is not clear if he ever paid for a prostitute himself. Some people suggested a prostitute once tricked him out of money, but this was never confirmed. On February 14, 1967, he met a 16-year-old woman named Sonia Surma in a pub. Sonia was from a family of refugees. They began a relationship and married on August 10, 1974. Sonia was studying to become a teacher. After they were married, she was diagnosed with a serious mental illness called paranoid schizophrenia. Their relationship was volatile. Sonia had sudden fits of anger, and Peter sometimes had to hold her down to stop her. She had several miscarriages and was told she could not have children. In 1977, Sonia finished her teacher training and started working. With her salary, she and Peter bought a house at 6 Garden Lane in Heaton. They moved in on September 26, 1977. After moving into the house in Heaton, Peter Sutcliffe continued his work as a truck driver. He also continued to drive around the red light districts of cities like Leeds, Bradford, and Manchester at night. His first known violent attack happened years earlier, in 1969. He was with a friend in a van. Sutcliffe got out and later returned out of breath. He told his friend he had hit a prostitute on the head with a stone in a sock. The woman reported the attack and police visited Sutcliffe, but she did not want to press charges, so he faced no punishment. His next known attack was on July 5, 1975, in the town of Keighley. A 36-year-old woman named Anna Rogalskij was walking alone at night. Sutcliffe approached her from behind and hit her in the head with a hammer. He then cut her stomach with a knife. A noise from a nearby house disturbed him, and he ran away. The woman survived after brain surgery, but was badly hurt physically and mentally. Just over a month later, on August 15th, he attacked 46-year-old Olive Smelt in Halifax. He first made a normal comment about the weather. Then, as she walked, he hit her in the back of the head with a hammer. He cut her with a knife before being interrupted again. She also survived. She told police her attacker had a local Yorkshire accent. 2 weeks after that, on August 27th, he attacked a 14-year-old girl named Tracy Brown. She was walking on a country lane near Silsden. He hit her head 5 times with a hammer before car lights scared him away. She needed brain surgery. Sutcliffe would not admit to this attack for many years. His first murder happened on October 30th, 1975. He killed a 28-year-old mother of 4 named Wilma McCann in Leeds. She had left her home in the Chapeltown area. Sutcliffe hit her in the back of the head twice with a hammer. A major police investigation began, but they did not find him. On January 20th, 1976, he killed 42-year-old Emily Jackson in Leeds. She was a prostitute. He picked her up in his truck, drove to an industrial area, and hit her with a hammer. He then stabbed her many times with a sharpened screwdriver. He left a boot print on her body. On May 9, 1976, he attacked 20-year-old Marcella Claxton. He offered her a ride in Leeds. When she got out of the car, he hit her from behind with a hammer. She survived but lost her unborn baby and suffered lasting brain damage. His attacks continued in 1977. On February 5th, he killed 28-year-old Irene Richardson, a prostitute, in a Leeds park. He used his hammer and a knife. He then neatly placed her boots by her body. Police found tire tracks nearby. On April 23rd, he killed 32-year-old Patricia Atkinson in her flat in Bradford. He hit her with a hammer and stabbed her. Police found a boot print on her bedsheets. On June 25th, he killed 16-year-old Jane McDonald. She was not a prostitute. She was walking home after missing her bus in Leeds. He attacked her with a hammer and a knife. Her death caused great public fear because she was a young teenager with no connection to prostitution. On July 10th, he attacked 43-year-old Maureen Long in Bradford. He offered her a lift, then hit her with a hammer when she left the car. She was found unconscious and spent 9 weeks in the hospital. A witness gave police a wrong description of his car. On October 1st, he killed 21-year-old Jean Jordan, a prostitute in Manchester. He hit her repeatedly with a hammer. He had paid her with a new £5 note. After killing her, he worried the banknote could be traced back to him. A week later, he returned to her body in a field to try to find the money, but could not. He then used a piece of glass and a hacksaw to badly damage her body. The body was found, and the £5 note was found hidden in her purse. Police traced the note to a bank in the area where Sutcliffe lived and worked. They interviewed 5,000 men from local factories, including Sutcliffe. His alibi about being at a family party was believed. On December 14th, he attacked 25-year-old prostitute Marilyn Moore in Leeds. He tried to hit her with a hammer in his car but lost his balance. She escaped and gave police a good description of him and his car. Police created a sketch that looked like Sutcliffe. In 1978, the police received a hoax tape and letters from a man calling himself Jack the Ripper, who had a different accent from another part of England. This distracted the investigation for a long time. Meanwhile, Sutcliffe kept attacking. On January 21st, he killed 21-year-old Yvonne Pearson in Bradford. He hit her with a hammer, jumped on her chest, and hid her body under an old sofa. On January 31st, he killed 18-year-old Helen Ritka in Huddersfield. He attacked her with a hammer at a timber yard. This was the only time he raped a victim. On May 16th, he killed 40-year-old Vera Millward in Manchester. He used his hammer and a screwdriver. In 1979, on April 4th, he killed 19-year-old Josephine Whitaker in Halifax. She was not a prostitute. She was a clerk walking home. He used a hammer and stabbed her many times with a screwdriver. On September 1st, he killed 20-year-old university student Barbara Leach in Bradford. Again, she was not a prostitute. He hit her with a hammer and stabbed her. His final attacks were in 1980. On August 20th, he killed 47-year-old civil servant Marguerite Walls. He hit her with a hammer, then used a rope. On September 24th, he attacked a 34-year-old doctor named Apadya Bandara in Leeds. He hit her and killed her with a rope. On October 25th, he attacked 21-year-old student Maureen Leah in Leeds, seriously injuring her. On November 5th, he attacked 16-year-old Teresa Sykes in Huddersfield. Her boyfriend heard her screams and Sutcliffe ran away. On November 17th, he killed his final victim, 20-year-old student Jacqueline Hill in Leeds. He hit her with a hammer and stabbed her with a screwdriver. Throughout this time, Sutcliffe was interviewed by police 9 times because his car was seen in red light areas where he matched descriptions. He was always released. However, on November 25, 1980, his friend Trevor Birdsall, who had been with him during the 1969 attack, finally went to the police and named Sutcliffe as a strong suspect. On January 2, 1981, Peter Sutcliffe was in Sheffield with a 24-year-old prostitute named Olivia Reivers. They were in his car in the driveway of an office building. A police officer, probationary constable Robert Hydes, decided to check the car. He found that Sutcliffe's license plates were false. Sutcliffe was arrested for this offense and taken to a police station in Dewsbury. Because Sutcliffe matched the general description of the wanted man known as the Yorkshire Ripper, officers decided to question him about the murders. The next day, Sergeant Robert Ring went back to the place where Sutcliffe was arrested. On a hunch, he searched the area and found a knife, a hammer, and a length of rope hidden behind an oil tank. Sutcliffe had thrown them there when he asked to urinate after his arrest. At the police station, Sutcliffe had also hidden a second knife in a toilet tank. The police then got a warrant to search Sutcliffe's house at 6 Garden Lane in Heaton. They brought his wife, Sonia, in for questioning. When officers stripped Sutcliffe at the station, they found he was wearing a heavy V-neck sweater under his trousers. The sleeves were pulled over his legs, and the neck hole was around his waist. The elbows of the sweater were padded. Police believed he wore this to protect his knees when he knelt over his victims. Confronted with the discovered weapons, Sutcliffe calmly confessed to being the Yorkshire Ripper. Over the next day, he described all his attacks in detail. At first, he said he had an uncontrollable urge to kill women. Later, he changed his story and claimed that God had told him to kill prostitutes to clean the streets. He only showed regret when talking about his youngest victim, Jane MacDonald. Sutcliffe was formally charged with murder on January 4, 1981. His arrest was announced to the public, and a large, angry crowd gathered when he first appeared in court at Dewsbury. His trial began in May 1981. Sutcliffe pleaded not guilty to 13 charges of murder. Instead, he pleaded guilty to manslaughter, claiming diminished responsibility due to mental illness. He said he heard the voice of God coming from a gravestone, ordering him to kill. For psychiatrists diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia. The prosecution was initially willing to accept the manslaughter plea based on this. However, the trial judge, Justice Sir Leslie Boreham, was not satisfied. He insisted the jury should decide. The prosecution then had to present its full case for murder. The trial lasted 2 weeks. The jury heard the evidence of the survivors and the details of the murders. They also heard from a prison officer who claimed he heard Sutcliffe tell his wife that if he pretended to be mad, he might only be sent to a mental hospital. The jury rejected the argument of mental illness. They found Peter Sutcliffe guilty of all 13 murders. He was also convicted of 7 counts of attempted murder. Justice Boreham sentenced him to life imprisonment with a recommendation that he serve at least 30 years. The judge said he hoped Sutcliffe would never be released. In 2010, the High Court formally imposed a whole life tariff, meaning he would die in prison. After the trial, an official report by Inspector of Constabulary Lawrence Byford was completed. It was highly critical of the police investigation. It found that the inquiry was badly organized, relying on paper files that became overwhelming. It stated that the police focused too much on the hoax tape and letters from Wearside Jack, which wasted time and resources. Sutcliffe had been interviewed 9 times during the investigation, but crucial information was not connected. The report also said Sutcliffe had likely committed more attacks than those for which he was convicted. Sutcliffe began his sentence in HM Prison Parkhurst. In 1984, he was transferred to Broadmoor High Security Hospital because of his mental health diagnoses. During his time in custody, he was attacked by other inmates on several occasions. One attack in 1997 left him blind in one eye. Over the years, various police forces investigated whether Sutcliffe was responsible for other unsolved murders from the 1960s and 1970s. He was questioned about some, but no further charges were ever brought. In 2016, a medical tribunal ruled he was no longer mentally ill, and he was moved from Broadmoor back to a regular prison, HM Prison Frankland. Peter Sutcliffe died in University Hospital of North Durham on November 13, 2020, at the age of 74. He had been taken there from prison for treatment related to heart problems and diabetes. His death was from natural causes. His body was cremated in a private ceremony. The long and troubled investigation into his crimes led to major changes in how British police handle major serial crime investigations, particularly in the use of computers to manage information. The failure to catch him sooner remains one of the most significant failures in British criminal justice history. Story 4. Jack Unterweger was born in 1950 in Judenburg, Austria. His mother, Teresa, worked as a barmaid and waitress. She had a criminal record for crimes like theft and fraud. The identity of Jack's father was not officially recorded. Teresa claimed the father was an American soldier named Jack Becker. Because of this, she gave her son the nickname Jack, though people in his childhood often called him Hunksy. When Jack was less than a year old, his mother was sent to prison for a previous crime. This meant Jack could not stay with her. He was placed with a foster mother in Plainfeld for about a year. In 1952, he was taken in by his grandfather, Ferdinand Wieser, and his grandfather's partner, Maria Springer. They lived in a small wooden lodge in Carinthia. Jack stayed with them until he was 8 years old. Later in life, Jack would describe his grandfather as a violent alcoholic who forced him to watch sexual acts. However, other relatives and neighbors said this was not true. They described his grandfather as a sickly man who did not go out much and said Jack was cared for. Maria Springer said Jack often lied and tried to cause trouble between her and his grandfather. In 1953, Jack's mother married an American soldier named Donald Van Blarcom. She began sending a small amount of child support money each month. Jack later said he thought this man might actually be his real father because they looked similar. In 1958, Maria Springer left his grandfather. Because his grandfather was too old and unwell to care for a child alone, Jack went to live with his great-aunt Juliana in Strasbourg for a few months. During this time, Jack later claimed he saw his best friend killed by a road roller. Official records show a young boy died in a similar accident around that time, but a cousin of Jack's said he did not know that boy and was not there when it happened. In 1959, Jack was placed into foster care again, this time with the Drofenik family in Liebenfels. From 1962 to 1965, he was sent to a reform school in Treffen. He left school in 1965 at age 15. He then began an apprenticeship to become a hotel waiter in St. Veit der Glan. He only kept this job for 6 months before he was fired. A youth welfare worker told his probation officer that Jack was known to harass girls at his old school. Throughout 1966, Jack started several other hotel waiter apprenticeships in different Austrian towns. He never stayed at any job for more than a few months. In November 1966, he was convicted of stealing money from hotel guests. This was his first criminal conviction. He was sentenced to a juvenile detention facility in Vienna for rehabilitation. He was released in December 1967. After his release, he continued to work as a waiter, but was often fired for stealing from the workplace or guests. When he turned 18, the regional court sent a letter to his mother. The letter said they would no longer provide him with social services because educational measures were unlikely to help him. From this point on, Jack drifted through Austria, taking occasional labor jobs. Between 1966 and 1974, Jack was convicted of crimes 16 times. Most early crimes were for theft and burglary. As he got older, his crimes began to include pimping, physical assault, and sexual assault. After his release from juvenile detention in late 1967, Jack Unterweger's crimes became more violent. On May 13, 1971, in Salzburg, he met a sex worker named Monica H. He offered her a ride in his car. He drove her to a remote area outside the city. Inside the car, he hit her in the back of the head with a metal rod. He then tied her up with her own underwear and sexually assaulted her with the rod. After the attack, the victim managed to alert passers-by, and Unterweger was arrested. While in jail for this crime, he attempted suicide with sleeping pills. He was moved to a psychiatric unit and was later released without returning to police custody. In August 1971, he went to West Germany but was deported back to Austria a few months later. He then spent 15 months in prison for stealing cars. On April 1, 1973, the body of a 23-year-old woman named Marika Horvath was found in a river near Salzburg. She had been tied up and strangled with a necktie. Police arrested Unterweger as a suspect because the tie had been purchased in Wels, where he lived. However, his girlfriend at the time gave him a false alibi, saying he was with her. With no physical evidence linking him to the crime, the investigation was stopped. The lead detective noted that the way Horvath was killed was very similar to Unterweger's known methods. On October 22, 1973, Unterweger picked up a young nurse named Maria W., who was hitchhiking. He drove her to a secluded area, stopped the car, and began punching her while trying to rape her. She fought back, escaped from the car, and ran into the woods screaming. After a struggle, Unterweger gave up and drove her back to her town. He convinced her not to go to the police. However, when she arrived at the hospital where she worked, she told her colleagues what happened and reported the attack. When police questioned Unterweger, he admitted to hitting her, but claimed it was part of a consensual encounter and that her injuries were from a car accident. In July 1974, he moved to Switzerland with a girlfriend. They lived on money she and other teenage girls earned through prostitution, which Unterweger arranged. In November 1974, they moved to West Germany. On the evening of December 11, 1974, Unterweger and his girlfriend, Barbara Scholz, broke into her parents' home to steal things. An 18-year-old friend of Scholz named Margaret Schaefer discovered them. They convinced Schaefer to come with them in their car. After stopping to steal more money, they drove to a forest near Herborn. Unterweger told Scholz to wait in the car. He then took Schaefer into the trees. He beat her with an iron bar, tied her up with her own pantyhose, raped her with the bar, and strangled her to death with his hands. After she was dead, he tied her bra around her neck in a specific way to make the murder look sexually motivated. He covered her body with leaves and dirt. In early January 1975, Unterweger committed a robbery at a jewelry store. He then called the parents of another girlfriend, demanding ransom money for her safe return. When he went to a bank in Basel to collect the money, police were waiting and arrested him for kidnapping. He was sent back to Austria. In July 1975, he was convicted for several rapes and assaults from the previous years and sentenced to 3 years in prison. Then, on June 1, 1976, he was tried for the murder of Margaret Schaefer. He was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. Barbara Scholes was also convicted as an accomplice. While serving his life sentence, Unterweger began writing. He wrote poems, short stories, plays, and an autobiography called Purgatory, or The Journey to Prison. He became known as a jail writer. Some people questioned whether he actually wrote these works himself, as he was known to plagiarize from others. In his writing, he talked about a difficult childhood, but left out the murder of Margaret Schaefer. He instead invented stories, like having an Aunt Anna, who was a murdered prostitute, to explain his anger toward women. In reality, this was based on a newspaper article about an unrelated woman with the same last name. A campaign by artists, writers, and journalists argued that he was rehabilitated. They pushed for his pardon and release. After serving the mandatory minimum of 15 years, Jack Unterweger was released from prison on May 23, 1990. After his release from prison in May 1990, a series of murders began. The first happened in September 1990 in Prague. A woman named Blanka Bukova was found strangled near a river. Between October 1990 and May 1991, the bodies of 7 women were found in different parts of Austria. All the victims were sex workers. They had been driven away from cities, beaten, and strangled. Some were strangled by hand, and others were killed with items of their own clothing, like bras or stockings. Police in Vienna, Graz, and Bregenz began to investigate these killings as connected crimes. During this same time, Jack Unterweger was living a public life. He worked as a journalist and even reported on television about the police investigations into these murders. He interviewed police officers and wrote articles about the difficulties of solving crimes against sex workers. He was seen as a reformed man who understood the criminal mind. In the summer of 1991, an Austrian magazine sent Unterweger to Los Angeles in the United States to write a story about prostitution. While he was there, 3 sex workers were murdered in June and July. These women were also beaten and strangled. A key clue was found. Each victim's bra had been cut and tied in a very specific, complicated knot, which was used to strangle them. Los Angeles police detectives noted this unusual knot. Back in Austria, police were struggling to find a suspect for their murders. Because of his violent history and his interest in the cases, Unterweger's name eventually came up. The police in Vienna placed him under surveillance, but they did not see him commit any crimes. He was questioned twice, but gave believable answers. After his trip to America, however, the police in Graz began to gather more serious evidence. They learned he had been in contact with some of the murdered women. A major break came when Unterweger made a phone call to Rudolf Prem, the husband of one of the murdered Viennese victims, Regina Prem. Unterweger had been making cruel phone calls to Rudolf for months. In this call, he falsely told Rudolf he could find his wife's body at a specific location. He also mentioned a total of 11 victims. This call was traced. Furthermore, Rudolf Prem gave the police his wife's diary, which described meetings with Unterweger and his violent behavior. With this new evidence, the Graz police had enough to arrest Unterweger. However, when they went to his home in February 1992, he was gone. He had fled the country with his 18-year-old girlfriend. Police in Austria, Switzerland, France, and the United States tracked his movements. He was finally located and arrested by U.S. Marshals in Miami, Florida, on February 27, 1992. Unterweger was sent back to Austria in May 1992 and put on trial for 11 murders. The 7 in Austria, the 1 in Prague, and the 3 in Los Angeles. The trial lasted a long time. The specific knot found on the Los Angeles victims was a crucial piece of evidence, matching Unterweger's known methods. Psychiatrists testified that he had a severe narcissistic personality disorder. On June 29, 1994, The jury found him guilty of 9 of the 11 murders. He was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole. On the night he was sentenced, Jack Unterweger was taken to Graz Carlisle prison. In his cell, he used shoelaces and a cord from his tracksuit pants to make a rope. He tied the rope into the same distinct knot used on the murder victims. He then used it to hang himself, ending his own life. Jack Unterweger died in his prison cell the same night. He was sentenced to spend the rest of his life there. Story 5. Bevan Spencer von Einem was born on the 29th of May, 1946, in Adelaide, South Australia. He was an only child. His family was middle class and lived in the suburbs of Adelaide. His father was involved in business. His mother took care of the home. As a boy, Bevan was described as quiet and well-behaved. He attended local schools. He was not a standout student, but he passed his classes. He did not participate much in sports or group activities. He preferred quieter hobbies. After finishing school, he began to study accountancy. Accountancy is the work of keeping and checking financial records. He was good with numbers and details. He completed his accountancy qualifications and began working in an office. He was a reliable employee. He did his work carefully and kept to himself. He lived in a house in the suburb of Paradise. He lived alone. He did not have a wife or children. His social life was very private. He had a few acquaintances, but no close friends that people knew about. He would sometimes go out for meals or to social events, but often alone. He was a neat and organized person. His home was always tidy. In his adult life, he developed problems with sleeping. He went to doctors to get help for this. The doctors prescribed him sedative drugs. These are strong pills that help a person sleep. He collected prescriptions for these drugs from different chemists. In the year 1972, an event happened that brought him to public attention. A man named George Duncan was killed by being thrown into the River Torrens. Another man, Roger James, was also thrown in but survived. Bevan von Einem was driving past afterwards. He saw Roger James, who was hurt and wet, on the side of the road. Von Einem stopped his car and helped the injured man. He drove Roger James to the hospital. The police later spoke to him because he was a witness to the aftermath of the crime. He told them what he had seen and done. This was the only time his name was in the newspapers for many years. He continued his life as an accountant. He lived a routine life. He worked, he went home, and he saw his mother regularly. To people who knew him casually, he seemed like a normal, quiet man. On the afternoon of June 5, 1983, a 15-year-old boy named Richard Kelvin was playing football with a friend in a park in North Adelaide. After the game, Richard walked his friend to a bus stop. He then began to walk home alone. His family home was just around the corner. He was expected home for dinner. At approximately 6:15 p.m., Richard was walking along Margaret Street, very close to his home. A witness, a security guard living on that street, heard sudden cries for help. The witness then heard car doors slamming shut and the sound of a car with a noisy exhaust speeding away. Richard Kelvin was gone. Bevan von Einem, driving his Ford Falcon, was in the North Adelaide area that evening. He saw Richard Kelvin. Von Einem stopped his car and engaged the boy in conversation. It is not known exactly what was said. Richard was then forced or persuaded into von Einem's car. This was the abduction. Von Einem drove Richard to his home in Paradise. He took the boy inside. From this point, Richard was held captive. He was kept inside von Einem's house for a period of 5 weeks. During this time, he was not allowed to leave. Richard was given large amounts of sedative drugs. These were the same types of drugs von Einem had prescriptions for, like Mandrax and Valium. The drugs were mixed into alcoholic drinks. This kept Richard heavily sedated, confused, and unable to resist or escape. Over the 5 weeks, Richard was sexually assaulted and physically abused. He was beaten. The abuse caused many injuries. Throughout this ordeal, he was still wearing the same clothes he had on when he was taken: a Channel 9 t-shirt, blue jeans, white sneakers, and a dog collar he wore as a fashion item. Around July 10th, 1983, the abuse caused a catastrophic internal injury. A blunt object was forced into his body, causing severe damage and massive blood loss. This injury is what killed Richard Kelvin. Either just before or after death, one of his front teeth was also fractured. After Richard died, von Einem cleaned the body. He then redressed it in the same clothing. He placed the body in the fetal position, with the knees bent up towards the chest. Late on July 10th, or in the very early hours of July 11th, von Einem put the body in his car and drove to a remote area in the Adelaide Hills, near One Tree Hill. This location was close to where some of his relatives lived. He drove down a dirt airstrip, stopped, and placed the body on the ground beside the track. He made no real effort to hide it. On July 24th, 1983, a geologist who was searching for rocks with his family found Richard Kelvin's body. The police were called. An autopsy was performed. The cause of death was confirmed as the massive anal injury. Tests also found a combination of 5 different sedative drugs in Richard's bloodstream. The police investigation into the murder quickly focused on the drugs. They began checking pharmacy records for people who had been prescribed these specific sedatives, particularly Mandrax. This search led them to a prescription for B. von Einem. Police knew this name. Von Einem had been questioned in previous years about the deaths of other young men, though never charged. On July 28th, for days after the body was found, police went to von Einem's home in Paradise. They asked if they could question him. Von Einem immediately said he would not speak without a lawyer. This made the officers suspicious. They asked to look around his house, and he agreed. In the house, police found a bottle of Mandrax pills. Von Einem said they were his, for sleep. Police asked if he had any other drugs. He said no. However, an officer then found a bottle of another sedative, Noctec, hidden on a ledge behind a wardrobe. When this was found, von Einem became nervous and said he rarely used those drugs. The police took the drugs and also took samples of von Einem's hair, his blood, and fibers from his carpets and bedding. The forensic tests began. Scientists compared fibers from von Einem's home with fibers found on Richard Kelvin's clothing. They found many matches. Hairs from von Einem were also found on Richard's clothes. The scientific evidence was starting to place Richard inside von Einem's home. During this time, von Einem went on a planned holiday overseas. When he returned, the police were waiting. They had gathered strong forensic links between him and the victim. Based on this evidence, they arrested Bevan von Einem on November 3, 1983, and charged him with the murder of Richard Kelvin. After his arrest, Bevan von Einem was held in custody to await trial. His first court appearance was a committal hearing in February 1984. This hearing was to decide if there was enough evidence for a full murder trial. At first, von Einem denied ever meeting Richard Kelvin. However, the forensic evidence was very strong. Scientists showed the court that many fibers from von Einem's home and car were found on Kelvin's clothes. Faced with this, von Einem changed his story. He now admitted he had met Kelvin on the night the boy disappeared. He claimed Kelvin willingly got into his car. They talked at his house for 2 hours, and then he dropped Kelvin off in the city. The magistrate did not believe this new story and ordered von Einem to stand trial for murder. The trial began in the Supreme Court of South Australia in October 1984. The prosecution's case was built on the forensic evidence. Expert witnesses explained how the fibers and hairs proved Richard Kelvin had been inside von Einem's home. A forensic entomologist, a scientist who studies insects, gave important evidence. He studied the fly larvae on Kelvin's body and compared them to larvae on a dead dog found nearby. This science showed that Kelvin's body had been dumped at the airstrip on July 10, 1983. This matched the time when von Einem was not at work. Pharmacists testified about von Einem's drug prescriptions. They showed he had obtained very large amounts of sedative drugs from multiple chemists. The specific drugs found in Kelvin's body matched the drugs von Einem had. The prosecution also pointed out the major flaws in von Einem's story. He had first told police he was sick in bed the night Kelvin vanished. His new story about a 2-hour visit did not explain how so many fibers from his house got onto Kelvin's clothes, especially after 5 weeks. The defense argued that the prosecution could not prove exactly how Kelvin died. They suggested someone else could have kidnapped Kelvin after von Einem met him. They called witnesses, including von Einem's mother, to try to support his account of his movements. However, under questioning, his mother's story did not fully match what she had told police earlier. This weakened the defense. The jury listened to all the evidence for several weeks. They then discussed the case in private. After 7.5 hours, they reached a verdict. They found Bevan von Einem guilty of the murder of Richard Kelvin. The judge sentenced him to life in prison. He set a non-parole period of 24 years, meaning von Einem could not apply for parole until that time was served. The government appealed this parole period, arguing it was too short. A higher court agreed and increased the non-parole period to 36 years. Von Einem's lawyers appealed the conviction itself, but the appeal was rejected. The court said the trial had been fair. While in prison, police continued to investigate von Einem for other murders of young men in the late 1970s and early 1980s. The manner of those crimes was very similar to the Kelvin murder. In 1990, he was charged with 2 of these other murders. However, a judge ruled that much of the evidence connecting him to those crimes could not be used in court. Without that evidence, the prosecution dropped the charges. He was never convicted of any other crime. Bevan von Einem remained in prison for the rest of his life. His applications for parole were always denied. In 2007, he was moved from Yatala Prison in Adelaide to Port Augusta Prison. In late 2025, his health declined. He was moved to the prison infirmary. He died there of natural causes on December 6, 2025, at the age of 79. He never admitted to the murder and never showed remorse. The family of Richard Kelvin and the families of the other suspected victims lived with the loss for decades, knowing the man responsible died in prison. Bevan Spencer von Einem spent 42 years in custody until his death, serving his sentence for the murder that the forensic evidence unequivocally proved he committed. Story 6. Martin Bryant was born in May 1967 in Hobart, Tasmania. He was the first child of Maurice and Carleen Bryant. The family lived in the suburb of Lena Valley, but also owned a simple beach house near the Port Arthur Historic Site, where they spent some holidays. Even as a small boy, Martin was seen as different. He was a disruptive child who would break his toys on purpose. His mother found his behavior annoying and hard to manage. When he was still young, his parents took him to see a psychiatrist. This doctor told them that Martin's behavior was so difficult that he would likely never be able to hold a normal job when he grew up. He started primary school in 1973. At school, he was a violent and disruptive student. He did not seem to connect with reality or show normal emotions. The other children bullied him severely because he was strange. He was suspended from one primary school in 1977. Around this time, reports noted that he was cruel to animals. He returned to school the next year, but still teased younger children. He was moved to a special education unit at a high school in 1980. His behavior and schoolwork got worse every year until he left school in 1983. When he finished school, a psychiatrist assessed him for a government disability pension. The psychiatrist wrote that Martin could not read or write. The report said he only did a little gardening and watched television. It noted that only his parents' constant care was stopping him from getting worse. The doctor thought he might be schizophrenic and said his parents faced a bleak future with him. Martin was granted the disability pension, though he sometimes worked as a handyman or gardener. In early 1987, when Martin was 19, he met a wealthy older woman named Helen Harvey. He met her while asking for lawn mowing work. Helen was 54 and very eccentric. She had inherited a lot of money from a lottery fortune. She lived in a big, rundown mansion in Newtown with her elderly mother and many pets. Martin began visiting regularly and helped with chores, like feeding her many dogs and cats. In 1990, health authorities were called to the mansion. They found Helen and her mother living in very bad conditions. Helen had infected sores and her mother had a broken hip. The mother was moved to a nursing home, where she died soon after. The local government ordered the mansion to be cleaned. Martin's father took time off work to help clean the filthy house. Animal welfare officers took away many of the pets. After the cleanup, Helen invited Martin to live with her in the mansion. The two became close friends. They began spending huge amounts of money very quickly. They bought more than 30 new cars in less than 3 years. They went shopping almost every day after having lunch at a restaurant. During this time, Martin's disability pension was reassessed. A note on his file stated that his father protected him from anything that might upset him because Martin often threatened violence. The note also recorded that Martin said he would like to go around shooting people. It concluded it would be unsafe to let Martin out of his parents' control. In 1991, because they were not allowed to keep animals at the mansion, Martin and Helen moved to a large farm Helen bought in a small town called Copping. Neighbors there remembered Martin always carrying an air rifle. He would shoot at tourists who stopped at a roadside apple stall. At night, he walked onto nearby properties and shot at dogs that barked at him. People in the town avoided him. In October 1992, Helen Harvey died in a car crash. She was driving with Martin in the passenger seat. Her car went onto the wrong side of the road and hit another car head-on. Helen and 2 of her dogs were killed. Martin was badly hurt and spent 7 months in the hospital. Police briefly investigated Martin because he had a habit of grabbing the steering wheel when Helen drove, which had caused accidents before. Helen had once told a neighbor, "One of these days the little bastard is going to kill me." Martin was named the only person to receive Helen's money and property in her will. He became very wealthy. Because he did not understand money, his mother went to court to have his finances managed by a public trustee. After Helen's death, Martin's father, Maurice, looked after the Copping farm. Maurice seemed depressed. 2 months later, in August 1993, a visitor found a note saying call the police on the farmhouse door. Police searched and found Morris's body in a dam on the property. He had a diving weight belt around his neck. His death was ruled a suicide. Martin received more money from his father's death. Now alone, Martin sold the farm but kept the mansion. His style of dress became very strange. He often wore fancy suits, a cravat, and a Panama hat, claiming he was a successful businessman. People in restaurants laughed at him. He had no friends. From 1993 to late 1995, Martin traveled overseas many times. He did not enjoy the places he visited, but liked the long airplane flights because he could talk to the passengers sitting next to him, who could not easily walk away. He felt very lonely. His drinking increased a lot. He often drank half a bottle of Sambuca and a bottle of Bailey's Irish Cream every day, along with other sweet alcoholic drinks. Martin Bryant felt increasingly isolated and angry. He began to think about doing something that would make people remember him. In the weeks before the event, he had become fascinated by news of a school shooting in Dunblane, Scotland. He started to form a plan. Bryant believed a local couple, David and Nolene Martin, were to blame for some of his problems. The Martins owned a guest house called Seascape. Bryant's father had wanted to buy this property but failed. His father had often complained about this, and Bryant came to believe the Martins had acted out of spite. He blamed them for his father's depression and suicide. On the morning of April 28, 1996, Bryant drove to the Martins' Seascape guest house. He was armed. He shot and killed both David and Nolene Martin inside their home. After killing them, he stole several of their firearms and took the keys to their property. He then got back into his yellow Volvo and drove towards the nearby Port Arthur Historic Site, a popular tourist destination. He arrived at Port Arthur, paid the small entry fee, and parked his car. He carried a large blue sports bag into the Broad Arrow Cafe. He ordered a meal and tried to make odd conversation with other visitors about wasps and Japanese tourists. After eating, he opened the sports bag. He took out a semi-automatic rifle. Without warning, he began firing the rifle from his hip at the people in the cafe. He moved quickly, shooting people who were eating lunch. In the first 15 seconds, he fired 17 shots. 12 people in the cafe were killed immediately. 10 others were wounded. He then walked to another part of the cafe and fired 12 more shots, killing 8 more people and wounding 2 others. He changed the magazine in his rifle and ran outside. In the car park, he shot at more people. He got into his yellow Volvo and began to drive away from the site. As he drove, he fired his rifle out of the car window at pedestrians and other cars. He killed 4 more people and injured 6 others during his escape from the historic site. He drove a short distance down the road, about 300 meters. He saw a woman, Nanette Mikak, walking with her 2 young daughters, Alana and Madeline. He stopped the car. He shot and killed Nanette and the 6-year-old child she was carrying. The older daughter, 3-year-old Madeline, ran away. Bryant chased her, caught her, and shot her at close range. Bryant then needed a new car. He saw a gold BMW stopped on the side of the road. He pulled up and shot and killed all 4 people inside it. He transferred his weapons and bag to this stolen BMW. He drove a little further and came across a couple in a white Toyota Corolla. He pointed his rifle at the man, Peter Nash, and forced him into the boot of the stolen BMW. He then fired 2 shots through the windshield of the Toyota, killing the woman, Sarah Loughton, who was in the driver's seat. Bryant drove the stolen BMW, with Peter Nash locked in the boot, back to the Seascape guest house where he had killed the Martins earlier. He set the stolen BMW on fire in the driveway. He then took Peter Nash hostage inside the guest house. The bodies of David and Nolene Martin were still inside. Police soon surrounded the property. They communicated with Bryant by telephone. He made only one demand. He wanted to be taken by an Australian Army helicopter to an airport. The police negotiator kept him talking for many hours. During this long siege, Bryant killed his hostage, Peter Nash. Eventually, the telephone battery died, ending all communication. The standoff continued through the night. Early the next morning, after about 18 hours, Bryant set fire to the Seascape guest house. He hoped to escape in the smoke and confusion. He ran from the burning building, but his clothes were on fire. He suffered burns to his back and legs. Police officers captured him on the lawn. He was taken to the Royal Hobart Hospital for treatment under heavy guard. After Martin Bryant was captured at the burning guest house, the full scale of the crime became clear to police. The scene at the Port Arthur Historic Site was secured. Detectives and forensic specialists began the long process of collecting evidence. They spoke to survivors, identified the victims, and mapped the path Bryant had taken. The stolen firearms from the Martins' home were linked to the shootings. The yellow Volvo and the burned BMW were examined for evidence. Bryant was treated in the hospital for his burns. While under guard, he was interviewed by police. He made confused and conflicting statements about his reasons for the killings. He was officially charged with multiple counts of murder. Psychiatric assessments were ordered by the court to determine if he was fit to stand trial. The doctors concluded that while he had a very low IQ and severe personality disorders, he understood the difference between right and wrong and was fit to face trial. His trial was scheduled to begin in November 1996. Initially, Martin Bryant pleaded not guilty to all charges. His court-appointed lawyer, John Avery, later persuaded him to change his plea. On November 22, 1996, Bryant appeared before the Supreme Court of Tasmania and pleaded guilty to 35 counts of murder, as well as many other charges including wounding and kidnapping. Because of the guilty plea, there was no need for a jury trial. The judge, Justice William Cox, reviewed the facts of the case, the psychiatric reports, and the impact on the victims' families. He then sentenced Bryant. Bryant received 35 life sentences for the murders, plus an additional 1,652 years in prison for the other crimes. The judge ordered that the life sentences be served for the term of your natural life. This meant Bryant would never be eligible for parole. He would die in prison. After sentencing, Bryant was taken to Risdon Prison in Hobart. For his own safety, he was placed in protective custody away from other prisoners. For the first 8 months, he was kept in a special cell designed to prevent suicide with constant observation. He remained in protective custody for 10 years. In 2006, he was moved to a secure mental health unit within the prison system called the Wilfred Lopez Center. Here, he was housed with other inmates with mental health issues under medical supervision. While in prison, Bryant had several incidents. In 2003, another inmate sprayed a cleaning chemical into his eyes, requiring hospital treatment. In 2007, he tried to kill himself twice by cutting his wrists and throat with razor blades. He was treated and returned to the secure unit. He remains incarcerated in a maximum security facility. The impact of the crime led to major changes in Australian law. The federal government and all state governments agreed to strict new gun control laws. These laws banned semi-automatic rifles and shotguns like the one used in the massacre. A large government-funded buyback scheme was implemented to take such weapons out of private ownership. The laws were passed with broad public support, partly due to the shock and grief caused by the event. The victims' families and survivors formed support groups. Many continued to advocate for gun law reform and for support services for victims of violence. A memorial garden was established at Port Arthur to remember those who were killed. The story of the crime and the investigation was told in official reports and documentaries. The legal system ensured that the person responsible was caught, pleaded guilty, and was sentenced to prison for life without any chance of release. The court process and the changes to gun laws were the direct results of the investigation into his actions on April 28, 1996. Martin Bryant remains in prison, serving a life sentence that will only end with his death. Story 7. David John Burney was born on February 16, 1951. He grew up in Wattle Grove, a suburb of Perth, Australia. He was the oldest of 5 children. His family was known by other people as being dysfunctional. There were many rumors about his family. These rumors included problems with alcohol and inappropriate relationships within the family. The family did not do normal things together. For example, they did not sit down to have regular meals. His parents did not cook meals for their children. During the early 1960s, David's family moved to a different Perth suburb. There, when he was about 15 years old, he met a girl named Catherine Margaret Harrison. They had mutual friends. Around this age, David left school. He began to work as an apprentice jockey at a race course. His job was to learn how to train and ride horses for racing. During this time, he was cruel to the horses. He also started a habit of exposing himself to others. One night, while he was living in a boarding house, he committed a serious act. He put stockings over his head to hide his face. He broke into the room of an elderly woman who lived there. He then tried to force her to have sex with him. This was an attempted rape. As he grew older, David was in prison many times. He went to prison for various smaller and more serious crimes. When he was an adult, he developed a strong addiction to sex and pornography. His interests in sex were not normal and were harmful. In his early 20s, David married a woman. They had a daughter named Tanya. By the time of the events in 1986, his daughter was 10 years old. David did not stay with this family. Later in life, in 1986, he was working at a car wrecker's shop. This is a place that breaks down old cars for parts. He worked in the suburb of Willagee. Catherine Margaret Harrison was born on May 23, 1951. Her life was difficult from a very young age. Her mother, Doreen, died when Catherine was only 2 years old. Her mother died while giving birth to a baby brother. This baby brother also died just 2 days after he was born. Catherine's father, Harold, found he could not raise the little girl alone. He sent Catherine to live with her mother's parents, her grandparents. When Catherine was 10 years old, there was a legal fight about who should care for her. This custody dispute ended with her father, Harold, taking her back to live with him. Catherine met David Burney when she was 12 years old. By the time she was 14, she and David had started a romantic relationship. Her father did not approve. He begged her many times to leave David. Being with David led Catherine into trouble with the police. Because of this trouble, she was sent to a prison for young people when she was a teenager. When she was released, a parole officer tried to help her. This officer encouraged her to take a job as a housekeeper for a family named McLaughlin. On her 21st birthday, Catherine married the man of that family, Donald McLaughlin. They had 7 children together. Their first child was a baby boy. This baby boy was hit and killed by a car. It was a tragedy. Then, in the year 1985, Catherine left her husband and her children. She went back to David Burney to resume their relationship. She changed her last name to Burney, even though they never had a legal wedding ceremony. At this time, they began living together in a house at 3 Morehouse Street in Willagee. David and Catherine Burney lived together at 3 Morehouse Street in Willagee. In October 1986, they began to commit crimes. Their plan was to bring women to their home by force. They would use David's car and offer things the women needed. The first victim was a 22-year-old university student named Mary Nielsen. Mary knew David from the car wrecker's shop where he worked. On October 6th, David offered to sell her cheap car tires. He gave her his phone number and address. When Mary came to the house on Morehouse Street to see the tires, she was tricked. Once inside, David and Catherine quickly overpowered her. They put a gag in her mouth. They used chains to tie her to a bed. David then raped Mary multiple times. Catherine was present and watched. After this, they drove Mary to a remote bush area near Albany Highway called Gleneagle. There, David raped her again. He then killed her by strangling her with a piece of nylon cord. To make her body decompose faster, he also stabbed her. He later said he read that stabbing would do this. David and Catherine buried Mary's body in a shallow grave they dug in the ground. 2 weeks later, on a road called Sterling Highway, they saw a 15-year-old schoolgirl named Susanna Candy. She was hitchhiking. They pulled over and offered her a ride. When she got into the car, they threatened her with a knife. They tied her up inside the vehicle. They took her to their house. At the house, they forced Susanna to write letters to her family. The letters said she was okay, so her family would not look for her. Then, they chained her to the same bed and David raped her. After, they decided to kill her. They tried to strangle her with the nylon cord, but it did not work at first. Instead, they forced many sleeping pills into her mouth. When the pills made her very sleepy, David put the cord around her neck. He then told Catherine to pull it tight. He said this was a test of her love for him. Catherine did as she was told and strangled the girl. They drove Susanna's body to the same area in Gleneagle and buried her near the first victim. Their third victim was a 31-year-old woman named Nolene Patterson. On November 1st, her car ran out of fuel on Canning Highway. The Bernies saw her and offered help. Once she was in their car, they again used a knife to control her. They took her to their house. David raped her repeatedly over several days. He kept her chained in the house. During these days, David seemed to develop a connection with Nolene. This made Catherine very jealous. Catherine told David he had to kill Nolene or she would kill herself. So, on November 4th, David forced a large number of sleeping pills into Nolene's mouth. When she was unconscious from the pills, he strangled her with his hands. They took her body to Gleneagle, but buried it in a different spot. Catherine later said she enjoyed throwing sand onto the dead woman's face. The next victim was 21-year-old Denise Brown. On November 5th, she was waiting at a bus stop on Sterling Highway. The Bernies pulled over and offered a ride. When she entered the car, they threatened her with the knife. They took her to the house on Morehouse Street, and the same pattern happened. She was chained and raped. The next day, they drove her to a pine plantation in Wanneroo. They waited in the car until it was dark. David raped Denise in the car. Then he took her into the trees, raped her again, and stabbed her in the neck with a knife. They thought she was dead. They dug a shallow grave and put her body in it. Suddenly, Denise sat up in the grave. She was still alive. David then took an axe from the car and hit her in the head twice with it. He buried her after that. Their final victim was a 17-year-old girl named Kate Moyer. On November 9th, she accepted a ride from them on the road. David immediately held a knife to her throat. They drove her to their house. At the house, they made her call her mother. They forced her to lie and say she was drunk and staying at a friend's house. They hoped this would stop her mother from worrying that night. Kate was handcuffed to the bed. David raped her. The next morning, David went to his job at the wrecker's shop. Catherine was at home with Kate. Catherine had to go to the front door to complete a small drug deal. She forgot to chain Kate to the bed before answering the door. This was a mistake. Kate saw her chance. She broke the lock on a window, climbed out, and ran away. She went to a nearby shop for help. Kate Moyer ran into a vacuum cleaner shop near the Bernies' house. She told the shop owner she had been raped and needed help. The shop owner called the police. When police officers arrived, Kate told them everything that had happened. She gave them the address where she was held, 3 Morehouse Street. She also remembered and gave them the phone number of the house. Some officers were unsure if her story was true, but a young police officer named Laura Hancock believed her. Kate remembered many specific details. She told them she had hidden a drawing inside the house. She also said the couple had watched the movie Rocky on their video cassette recorder. The police went to the house on Morehouse Street immediately. David and Catherine Bernie were still there. The police arrested them both. Inside the house, the police found the drawing Kate said she had hidden. They also found the Rocky video cassette in the recorder, just as she described. This evidence proved Kate's story was true. The police then began a full search of the house. They found chains, handcuffs, knives, and other items used in the crimes. The police separated David and Catherine for questioning. At first, they both told different lies. Catherine said she had never seen Kate Moyer before. David said Kate had come to the house willingly for sex. Their stories did not match. A detective named Vince Kadich spoke to David for a long time. He convinced David that the evidence was too strong. David finally decided to tell the truth. He confessed to the crimes against Kate Moyer. He also confessed to the murders of the 4 other women. He told the police where they had buried the bodies. Police officers went to the bushland area in Gleneagle. Using David's directions, they found the shallow graves of Mary Nielsen, Susanna Candy, and Nolene Patterson. They then went to the pine plantation in Wanneroo. There, they found the grave of Denise Brown. All the victims' bodies were recovered. This confirmed David's full confession. David and Catherine Burney were charged with multiple crimes. These included 4 counts of murder, abduction, and rape. In court, David pleaded guilty to all the charges. When asked why he pleaded guilty, he pointed to the families of the victims in the courtroom and said it was the least he could do. Catherine was evaluated by doctors. They decided she was sane and could stand trial. She was also found guilty on all the same charges. The judge sentenced both David and Catherine Burney to life in prison for each of the 4 murders. The law at that time said they must serve at least 20 years before they could ask for parole. They were sent to different maximum security prisons. In prison, David was first kept at Fremantle Prison. He was soon moved to solitary confinement for his own safety. Other prisoners wanted to harm him because of his crimes. In 2005, he was found dead in his cell at Casuarina Prison. He had killed himself by hanging. An investigation found he was very depressed and had not been given his proper medication. Catherine Burney was sent to Bandyup Women's Prison. Over the years, she applied for parole several times. Each time, the parole board and the government ministers rejected her application. The families of the victims fought to keep her in prison. In 2009, the government made a final decision. They stated that Catherine Burney should never be released from prison. She is one of only a few women in Australia to have her sentence marked never to be released. She remains in prison today. Kate Moyer, the survivor, recovered from her ordeal. As an adult, she campaigned to change parole laws so that violent criminals could not apply for parole so often. The families of the murdered women had to live with their loss for the rest of their lives. David and Catherine Burney were caught because their final victim escaped, remembered crucial details, and led the police directly to their door, ending their crimes for good. Story 8. Catherine Knight was born in 1955 in the town of Tenterfield, Australia. She was one of a set of twin girls. Her family life was very troubled from the beginning. Her mother, Barbara, had been married to another man but left him for Catherine's father, Ken Knight. This caused a big scandal in their small town, so the family had to move away. Ken Knight, Catherine's father, drank alcohol very heavily. He was often violent towards his wife, Barbara. Barbara, in turn, spoke to her daughters about things that were not appropriate for children to hear. She told them detailed stories about her sex life and said she hated men. This confused the young girls. Catherine later said that several family members hurt her sexually when she was a child. Doctors who later examined her believed these things did happen. The only person Catherine felt close to was her uncle Oscar. He was kind to her. She was very upset when he died by suicide when she was 14 years old. After his death, her family moved back to the town of Aberdeen. At her high school in Musselbrook, Catherine did not have friends. Other students remember her as a bully. She would pick on smaller children. She once hurt a boy at school with a weapon. A teacher once had to defend himself from her, and he hurt her by accident. When she was not angry, she could be very well behaved and even won awards for good behavior. This showed 2 very different sides to her personality. Catherine left school when she was 15 years old. She never learned how to read or write properly. Her first job was in a clothing factory cutting fabric. Then she got a job she loved much more. She began working at the local abattoir, which is a place where animals are killed for meat. She started by cutting organ meat. She was good at the work and was soon given the job of cutting bones. The abattoir gave her a special set of sharp butcher's knives. She took these knives home. She hung them on the wall over her bed. She said this was so they would always be handy if she needed them. People in the town started to know her as someone who would quickly make violent threats if she became angry. When she was 18, she met a man named David Kellett at the abattoir. David had problems of his own. He drank a lot because he had seen some very bad accidents in his old job. He and Catherine became friends. She would often help him in fights. They decided to get married in 1974. On their wedding night, Catherine tried to choke David because he fell asleep. This was a sign of the violence to come. Their marriage was full of fighting and attacks. Once, when Catherine was pregnant, she became angry because David came home late. She burned all his clothes and then hit him in the head with a heavy frying pan. David was very badly hurt and ran to a neighbor's house. The police wanted to charge Catherine with a crime, but she acted very nicely to David, and he decided not to press charges. After their first baby, a daughter named Melissa, was born, David left Catherine. He moved to another state because he could not take the abuse anymore. Catherine did not take this well. She was seen pushing her baby's pram violently down the street. She was admitted to a hospital for mental health care. After she was let out, she did something very dangerous. She placed her 2-month-old baby on a railway track just before a train was due. A homeless man found the baby and rescued her just in time. Catherine was arrested again. Soon after, Catherine cut a woman's face with one of her knives. She forced the woman to drive her, trying to find David. The woman escaped at a petrol station. Catherine then took a young boy hostage there, holding a knife to him. The police used brooms to disarm her. She was sent to a psychiatric hospital for treatment. She told nurses she had planned to kill several people. When David heard about all this, he felt sorry for her and came back. They moved to a new city together and had a second daughter. In 1984, Catherine left David. She moved back to her hometown of Aberdeen with her 2 children. She hurt her back at work and could not work anymore. The government gave her a house to live in because she had no money. After leaving her husband David Kellett, Catherine Knight began a relationship with a miner named David Saunders in 1986. He moved into her government house with her and her 2 daughters. Catherine was very jealous and possessive. She often threw Saunders out of the house after arguments. He would go back to his old apartment, and she would follow him, apologizing and asking him to return. This pattern happened many times. In May 1987, Catherine did something to frighten David Saunders. She cut the throat of his 2-month-old pet dingo puppy in front of him. She told him this was a warning. She said it showed what would happen to him if he ever was unfaithful to her. Later, she hit him in the head with a frying pan so hard that he lost consciousness. They had a daughter together in 1988, but the relationship remained violent. During one argument, she hit him in the face with a hot clothes iron and then stabbed him in the stomach with a pair of scissors. Eventually, Saunders was too afraid to stay. He took a long break from his job and hid from her. When he came back later to visit his daughter, he found that Catherine had cut all of his clothes into pieces with her knives. Catherine's next relationship was with a man named John Chillingworth, a former co-worker from the abattoir. She had a son with him in 1992. This relationship lasted about 3 years before she left him for another man. In 1995, Catherine started a relationship with John Price. John was a well-liked man who worked in the local mines. He had 3 children from a previous marriage, and his 2 older children lived with him. John knew about Catherine's reputation for violence, but she moved into his house anyway. For a while, things were peaceful. John's children liked her, and he was earning good money. The problems began in 1998. Catherine wanted John to marry her, but he refused. To get revenge, she used a video camera. She filmed items in his house that he had taken from his workplace rubbish tip. These were old, thrown-away medical kits. She sent the tape to his boss and claimed John had stolen them. Because of this, John was fired from his job of 17 years. He was very angry and immediately kicked Catherine out of his house. She had to go back to live in her own government house. Everyone in the small town heard about what she had done. After a few months, John Price restarted the relationship with Catherine. However, he never allowed her to move back in with him. Their fights became more and more frequent. In February 2000, their arguments turned physically violent again. Catherine stabbed John in the chest during one fight. This finally made John decide to end things for good. On February 28, 2000, John Price went to the local court on his way to work. He got a legal order called a restraining order against Catherine. This paper legally forbade her from coming near him or his children. That afternoon at work, John told his co-workers he was worried. He said if he did not come to work the next day, it would be because Catherine Knight had killed him. His co-workers told him not to go home, but John said he was afraid she would hurt his children if he did not. John went home. He found that his children were not there. Catherine had arranged for them to have a sleepover at a friend's house. John spent the evening with his neighbors and then went to bed alone at 11 p.m. Earlier that same day, Catherine Knight had done several things. She bought new black underwear. She used a video camera to record her own children talking. Her comments on the tape were later seen as a strange kind of will. Later that night, she went to John Price's house while he was asleep. She sat and watched television for a short time. Then she took a shower. After her shower, she woke John up and they had sex. Afterward, John went back to sleep. While John Price was sleeping, Catherine Knight took a butcher's knife from her set of knives. She stabbed him in his bed. The evidence showed he woke up and tried to turn on his bedside lamp. He then tried to escape. He ran from the bedroom through the house while Catherine chased him, stabbing him many more times. He managed to open the front door and get outside onto the porch, but he then either fell back inside or was pulled back inside by Catherine. He collapsed and died in the hallway from blood loss. He had been stabbed at least 37 times in the front and back of his body. After John Price was dead, Catherine Knight did something very extreme. She took her butchering knives and skinned his body. She hung the skin from a meat hook on a door frame in the living room. She then cut off his head. She took parts of his body into the kitchen and cooked them in pots with vegetables like potatoes, carrots, and cabbage. She made a gravy. She set the dining table with 2 plates. Each plate had a note with the name of one of John Price's children. It appeared she was preparing to serve their father to them as a meal. A third portion of the cooked meat was found thrown on the back lawn. Catherine also wrote a note. The note claimed John had hurt her daughter, but police later found these accusations were not true. She placed this note on a photograph of John. In the early morning, after these acts, Catherine Knight took some of John Price's money from his bank account using a cash machine. She then returned to the house. She took a large number of pills in an attempt to kill herself. She became unconscious. The next morning, a neighbor saw John's car was still there and became worried. When John did not arrive at work, his boss sent a co-worker to check on him. The neighbor and the co-worker saw blood on the front door. They called the police. The police broke into the house. They found the scene inside and the body of John Price. They found Catherine Knight alive, but unconscious from the pills. When the police broke into John Price's house on the morning of March 1st, 2000, they immediately saw a scene of extreme violence. There was a large amount of blood in the hallway and other rooms. They found John Price's body. It was clear he had been attacked with a sharp weapon many times. In the living room, they saw human skin hanging from a hook on a door frame. In the kitchen and dining area, they found cooked meat and vegetables set out on plates. A head was discovered in a pot on the stove. The officers quickly secured the house as a crime scene. The police also found Catherine Knight in the house. She was alive but unconscious from taking a large number of pills. An ambulance was called. She was taken to the hospital for emergency medical treatment. Police officers went with her to guard her. Once she was physically stable, she was placed under arrest for murder. Detectives began a detailed investigation of the house. They collected the knives used in the crime. They took the pots and plates as evidence. They photographed everything in detail. Forensic experts tested the blood and the cooked meat. The tests confirmed the meat was human flesh from John Price. The police investigation involved speaking to many people. They interviewed John Price's neighbors, his co-workers, and his children. The co-workers told police about John's fear of Catherine and his statement the day before that she might kill him. The neighbors described the couple's violent arguments. Detectives also learned about the restraining order John had gotten just the previous day. They gathered Catherine's long history of violent acts from past police reports and from her previous partners. All of this built a very strong case against her. Catherine Knight was charged with murder. While she was in jail waiting for her trial, she was examined by several psychiatrists. These doctors tried to understand her mental state. Some psychiatrists said she had a condition called borderline personality disorder. They noted she might have felt abandoned and reacted with extreme rage. Catherine claimed she could not remember killing John Price or what she did afterward. The psychiatrists agreed she might have blocked out the memory, a condition called dissociation. However, all the doctors agreed she was legally sane. This meant she could understand the difference between right and wrong at the time of the crime, and therefore she could stand trial. Her legal trial began in October 2001. At first, Catherine pleaded not guilty to murder. A jury was selected to hear the case. The judge warned them the evidence would be very graphic and disturbing. The day after the trial started, Catherine Knight changed her mind. She told the judge she wanted to change her plea to guilty. The judge ordered another quick psychiatric check to make sure she understood what a guilty plea meant. The doctors confirmed she did. Her guilty plea was accepted, and the jury was dismissed. There was no longer a need for a trial to decide if she did it, only to decide her punishment. Next, a sentencing hearing was held. The prosecutor presented all the facts of the crime to the judge. He described the stabbing, the skinning, and the cooking. He talked about John Price's fear and the terror he must have felt. He read statements from John Price's family about their loss and pain. Catherine Knight's lawyers argued that her mental problems should be considered. They said she was sorry for what happened. However, when a forensic scientist began testifying about the details of the skinning, Catherine became very upset and hysterical in the courtroom. She had to be given a sedative medicine to calm down. The judge, Justice Barry O'Keefe, made his decision on November 8, 2001. He said the crime was one of the worst he had ever seen. He said it was a cruel and planned act, not a sudden loss of control. He noted that Catherine Knight had a long history of violence that kept getting worse. He said she showed no real remorse for taking a man's life. Because of the extreme nature of the crime, he gave her the most severe sentence possible under Australian law. He sentenced Catherine Knight to life in prison. He also specified that she should never be released on parole. He said her prison papers must be marked, never to be released. This was the first time in Australian history that a woman had received such a sentence. In 2006, Catherine Knight appealed her sentence. She argued that a life sentence with no chance of parole was too harsh. A higher court reviewed the case and disagreed. The judges upheld the original sentence, calling the crime appalling and so horrible it was almost beyond belief. Catherine Knight was sent to the Silverwater Women's Correctional Center. In prison, she has not been violent. Reports say she has taken a role as a mediator among other prisoners and has not broken prison rules. John Price's children had to grow up without their father. His family and friends were deeply traumatized by his death and the horrifying details that emerged. The case remains a shocking example of domestic violence that ended in the most brutal way imaginable. Catherine Knight will spend every day of the rest of her life in prison. Story 9. Ivan Milat was born on December 27, 1944, in Australia. His father, Stephen Milat, had moved to Australia from Croatia. His mother, Margaret Milat, was Australian. Ivan was the fifth child in a very large family. He would eventually have 13 brothers and sisters. The family was poor. They first lived in a small, old farmhouse in Bossley Park, a rural area west of Sydney. The house was basic and the family had little money. Life was hard. When Ivan was still a boy, the family moved to a house in Liverpool, a suburb of Sydney. This house was also crowded because of the many children. His parents were strict. They made sure all the children went to Catholic school. They wanted their children to have an education and to behave well. However, Ivan's father had a problem. He drank alcohol often. When he drank, he became angry and had a violent temper. This made the home environment tense and sometimes frightening. Ivan and his brothers were often outside. They spent a lot of time in the bushland near their homes. From a young age, they were taught to use knives and guns. They would practice shooting at targets in the yard. Many of the Milat boys were known to the local police for causing small troubles. From his early teenage years, Ivan showed disturbing behavior. He was cruel to animals. He would hurt them with knives or machetes. This behavior was serious enough that his parents sent him to a special boarding school for troubled boys when he was about 13 years old. This did not change his ways. By the time he was 17, Ivan was stealing. He was sent to a juvenile detention center for theft. At 19, he was involved in breaking into a shop. In 1964, when he was 20, he was sentenced to 18 months in prison for breaking into a building. Shortly after he was released, he was caught driving a stolen car. For this, he was sentenced to 2 years of hard labor. In September 1967, Ivan was 22 years old. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison for another theft. His early adult life was a pattern of being in and out of prison for theft and robbery. He did not hold a steady job during these years. On April 7, 1971, something more serious happened. Ivan was 26. He offered a ride to two 18-year-old women who were hitchhiking near the Liverpool train station. He had a knife. He drove them to a remote area, where he raped one of them. He then drove to a petrol station cafe. While he was inside the cafe, the two women managed to run away and get help. Ivan was arrested later that same day. He was charged with rape and armed robbery. While he was waiting for his trial for these crimes, Ivan committed more robberies with some of his brothers. Then, he tried to trick the police. He went to a cliff in Sydney called the Gap, where people often went to end their lives. He left his shoes there to make it look like he had jumped. The police thought he might be dead. Instead, Ivan fled. He is believed to have traveled to Queensland and Victoria, and then used a fake passport to fly to New Zealand. He lived there for about 2 years. He returned to Australia secretly, living in different states to avoid the police. In 1974, his mother became very ill and was taken to hospital. Ivan returned to see her. Because of this, the police found him and arrested him for the earlier robbery and kidnapping charges. However, with the help of the family's lawyer, he was found not guilty at trial. The case against him fell apart. In 1975, Ivan finally got a steady job. He began working as a truck driver for the Government Roads and Traffic Authority. He would work for this organization on and off for many years. In 1977, he tried to attack 2 more women who were hitchhiking. He tried to rape and kill them, but they fought back and escaped. He was never charged for this crime. Ivan's personal life changed in the early 1980s. He met a 16-year-old girl named Karen Duck in 1983. She was already pregnant, but not with his child. They married in 1984 and later had a daughter together. People who knew him said he was obsessed with guns. His wife later said he was violent towards her. She left him in 1987 because of this violence, and they divorced in 1989. Ivan Milat continued his job as a road worker. He drove trucks and worked on highways. He often traveled long distances for his work. He knew the back roads and forests of New South Wales very well. He also continued to pick up hitchhikers. On December 30th, 1989, a young Australian couple was traveling. Deborah Everest and James Gibson, both 19 years old, had left Melbourne. They were headed for a festival near the town of Albury. They planned to hitchhike. They were last seen in Sydney at a backpacker hostel. They then began hitchhiking south on the Hume Highway. This highway passes very close to the Belanglo State Forest. Ivan Milat was not working that day. He was driving his four-wheel drive vehicle. He saw the couple and offered them a ride. They got into his car. He drove them into the Belanglo State Forest. This is a large, remote pine forest. He attacked them there. He stabbed James Gibson many times. One stab wound cut into his spine, which would have paralyzed him. He also stabbed Deborah Everest. He beat her very badly with a heavy object, breaking her skull and jaw. He then buried their bodies in shallow graves in different parts of the forest. After the crime, he kept some of their belongings. A few weeks later, a bushwalker found James Gibson's damaged camera on a road north of Sydney. A month after that, Gibson's empty backpack was found in the same area. Police did not connect these items to the Belanglo forest at the time. The couple was reported missing, but no one knew where they had gone. On January 20th, 1991, a German backpacker named Simone Schmidl, who was 21 years old, left Sydney. She planned to hitchhike to Melbourne to meet her mother. She was last seen at a train station in western Sydney, trying to get a ride on the highway. Ivan Milat was not at work that day. He picked her up. He again drove into the Belanglo State Forest. There, he stabbed her at least 8 times. One of the knife wounds severed her spine. He buried her body in a clearing off a fire trail in the forest. He also kept some of her clothing. Later that same year, on December 26, 1991, another German couple disappeared. Gabor Neugebauer, 21, and Anya Habshid, 20, left a hostel in Sydney. They wanted to hitchhike to Mildura. They were last seen getting into a vehicle. Ivan Milat was not working. He used the same method. He offered them a ride in his four-wheel drive. He took them to Belanglo State Forest. His method was becoming more violent. He tied up Gabor Neugebauer with rope. He then shot him in the head 6 times with a .22 caliber rifle. He attacked Anya Habshid with a knife. He stabbed her, and then he cut off her head. Her skull was never found. He buried their bodies in separate, shallow graves about 50 meters apart. He took items of their clothing and other personal belongings. On April 18, 1992, 2 British backpackers disappeared. Joanne Walters, 22, and Caroline Clark, 21, left a hostel in Sydney. They planned to hitchhike south to work on fruit farms. They were last seen near Bulli Pass, asking for directions to the Hume Highway. Ivan Milat was not at work. He picked them up. He drove them into the Belanglo State Forest. He stabbed Joanne Walters 15 times. 4 wounds were in her chest, 1 in her neck, and 9 in her back. The wounds to her back would have paralyzed her. He then turned on Caroline Clark. He did not stab her. Instead, he made her kneel down near a grave he had dug. He then shot her in the head 10 times with his .22 caliber rifle. Police later believed he used her for target practice. He buried their bodies close together in the forest. During these years, other hitchhikers had close escapes. One man, Paul Onions from England, was backpacking in January 1990. He was hitchhiking on the Hume Highway near Liverpool. A man in a silver four-wheel drive picked him up. The man introduced himself as Bill. He drove south towards the Belanglo State Forest. Just before the forest, Bill pulled out a gun and some rope and said he was going to rob Paul. Paul Onions opened the car door and ran away. Bill shot at him with a revolver but missed. Paul Onions flagged down a passing car. The driver, a woman named Joan Barry, took him to the police station in the town of Bowral. Paul reported the crime. He described the man and the car, including part of its license plate number. The local police wrote a report, but it was not connected to the missing backpackers at the time. For years, the bodies in the Belanglo State Forest were not found. The families of the missing backpackers were desperate for news. Police in different areas had missing persons files, but no one knew the crimes were linked. The forest was large and quiet. Ivan Milat continued his normal life, working and seeing his family. He had no reason to think anyone would ever look in that remote part of the forest. The crimes began to be discovered in September 1992. Two people who were running in the Belanglo State Forest for sport found a body that was partly hidden. They alerted the police. The next day, police searched the area and found a second body nearby. These were the bodies of Caroline Clark and Joan Walters, the British backpackers. Police identified them using dental records. The way they were killed, multiple stab wounds and gunshots, showed this was a very violent murder. Police searched the forest, but did not find any other bodies at that time. They did not know a serial killer was active. A year later, in October 1993, a man was collecting firewood in a different, more remote part of the Belanglo forest. He found human bones. He called the police. Police came and found two more bodies. These were identified as the missing Australian couple, Deborah Everest and James Gibson. Now the police knew they had a major problem. They formed a special group of detectives called Task Force Air to investigate all these deaths. They understood one person might be killing hitchhikers. Just a few weeks later, in November 1993, police did a big search of the whole forest. They found three more bodies. One was Simone Schmidl, the German backpacker. The other two were the second German couple, Gabor Neugebauer and Anja Habschied. 7 victims had now been found in the same forest. The police knew they were looking for a serial killer. The New South Wales government offered a large reward for information. The police task force started collecting all information. They looked at reports of attacks on hitchhikers that did not end in death. In their files, they found the 1990 report from Paul Onions, the English backpacker who had escaped. He had described a man named Bill, who tried to rob him with a gun and rope near Belanglo. The police found the original note with the description of the car and a partial license plate number. They contacted Paul Onions, who was now back in England. He agreed to help. At the same time, detectives were looking at people who worked on the roads and knew the forest. Ivan Milat's name came up because he was a road worker. They began to watch him secretly. They learned he had sold his silver 4-wheel drive car shortly after the first 2 bodies were found. They checked his work records and saw he was not at work on the days each of the backpackers disappeared. They talked to people who knew him, who said he loved guns and knives. The police arranged for Paul Onions to fly back to Australia. In May 1994, they showed him a photo of Ivan Milat. Paul Onions positively identified him as the man Bill, who had tried to kidnap him. This gave the police a direct link between Milat and the forest where the bodies were found. On May 22, 1994, a large team of police officers surrounded Ivan Milat's house. They arrested him. At first, they arrested him for the armed robbery and attempted kidnapping of Paul Onions. They then got permission to search his house and the houses of his family members. During these searches, they found very important evidence. They found a .22 caliber rifle. This was the same type of gun used to shoot Caroline Clark and Gabor Neugebauer. They also found a Bowie knife, which was the type of knife used on the victims. Most importantly, they found camping equipment, clothing, and personal items that belonged to the murdered backpackers. Ivan Milat had kept these things as trophies. On May 31st, 1994, Ivan Milat was charged with the 7 murders. His trial began in March 1996. The trial went on for many weeks. The prosecutor showed all the evidence, the weapons, the victims' belongings found at Milat's house, the work records showing he was free on the crime days, and the testimony from Paul Onions. Milat's defense lawyer argued that there was no direct proof, like an eyewitness to the murders. He suggested that maybe Milat's brothers were involved. Milat himself did not testify much. He mostly said it was not him. The jury did not believe his story. On July 27, 1996, the jury found Ivan Milat guilty of all 7 murders. He was also found guilty of the crimes against Paul Onions. The judge gave him a life sentence in prison for each murder. The judge said he should never be released from prison. For the attack on Paul Onions, he received additional prison sentences. After the trial, Ivan Milat was sent to a high-security prison. He tried to appeal his conviction many times, but every court refused his appeals. He remained in prison. Over the years, he caused problems in jail. He once tried to escape with another prisoner. He also hurt himself on purpose at times, like swallowing metal objects or cutting off his own finger to get attention or to try to be moved to a hospital. In his final years, Ivan Milat became very sick with cancer. He was moved from the prison to a hospital wing for treatment. He never confessed to the murders officially. Police visited him many times while he was sick, hoping he would finally admit to his crimes and give details to the victims' families, but he did not. Ivan Milat died in the prison hospital on October 27, 2019, from cancer. The victims' families had to live with their loss forever. The case of the backpacker murders remains one of the most famous in Australian history because of its cruelty and because it showed the dangers of hitchhiking. The Belanglo State Forest is now a place people remember for this tragedy. The police task force successfully closed the case, and the man responsible died in prison. Ivan Milat was buried without any public ceremony, and his crimes are now a part of history.